Shabbat Shalom and welcome. This is Torah study for Shabbos. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein here in rainy, miserable Southern California, joined by my dear friend and teacher, Rabbi Mark Gelman of South Florida and Temple Beth Torah in Melville, New York. Mark, Shabbat Shalom and welcome.
Shabbat shalom, my friend.
I hope you're doing okay this week. I know it's a tough week, but
Yeah,
we're going
yeah,
to be
yeah.
together and we're going to help each other. So this week we move right to the middle of the Torah, right to the middle of the book of Shemot. We got out of Egypt. Four parshiot told us the story of our enslavement and our liberation. Last week we crossed the sea. We sang the song. The manna rained down from heaven. And this week we arrive at the literal crux of the matter. We come to Mount Sinai. But before we come to Mount Sinai, there is an episode, remarkable episode. And what happens is Moses is schlepping this people across the desert, and they are fetching, and they are bothering him, and they are demanding, and he looks like hell. And out of the desert comes his father-in-law, Jethro, with his wife, Zipporah, and his two kids, right? And reunites the family. And Jethro, who has been the chieftain of the Midianites his whole career, looks at his poor farblunged son-in-law and says, "What are you doing? What are you doing?
You're burning yourself out.
You're answering everyone's questions. Why are you doing this?" And Moses said, "I thought that's what I'm supposed to do." And Jethro says, "Boy, let me teach you how to lead a people." And it is the most wonderful moment because Moses realizes he doesn't know what he's doing. And God hasn't taught him how to be the leader of a people. God helped him get across the sea. God brought the plagues and smashed the Pharaoh. But the sustained project of leadership and the transformation of a people is a whole different dynamic than smashing the Pharaoh and splitting the sea. And the person who knows how to do this is not a Jew. He's not an Israelite. He's Jethro, prince or the priest of Midian. And ironically, the Torah portion's named for him. A Torah portion's named for a non-Jew. There's two in the whole Torah. The other one, of course, is Bilam. And here, Jethro sits him down and says, "Son, let me teach you how to do this." Now, Mark, that's remarkable because Moses is supposed to be like, well, heck, Moses. I mean, he's supposed to know everything. He's God's guy. And yet he needs Jethro to teach him how to be a leader. What do you make of this? What does this represent in our history?
Well, I think it comes to the fundamental choice that every one of us has to make as Jews. Do we believe in a religion that is completely self-sustaining and doesn't need to be infused with new ideas from outside the religion? Or do we believe in a religion that is constantly enriched by what the world is learning?
Hmm.
That's the choice. And we see that choice played out in our own time. You look at certain ultra-Orthodox groups and you see, their decision is to live a life that is completely cut off from the world. That's fine if that's because that's their decision about what Judaism requires. It has certain advantages, that's obvious. You don't assimilate, you don't have problems of your kids being drawn away from Judaism. But its difficulties are that you don't know anything about anything that the world is learning. You don't know anything about science. You don't learn anything about what the technology of the world is doing
Mm-hmm.
to your life. And you don't know anything about what people are like who are not Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
This is a big thing that I used to say and Tommy Hartman, the priest, my pal in the God Squad, may his memory be blessed, he would say, when we would go to a Catholic school, he would say, and do any of you know any Jews? I mean, here you are, you have a wonderful school, good teachers, you're happy, but you have a real problem. You're disadvantaged. And you're disadvantaged because you don't know any Jews. My best friend is a rabbi. And I never would have had him as a best friend if I was just in a Catholic school. And I would say the same thing when I went to Jewish day schools. I said, do you have non-Jewish friends? I mean, not just peripheral friends, but like best friends, besties. Do you? Because if you don't have a non-Jew who's a best friend, there's a real chance that you're prejudiced, that somehow deep down you're not open to other people and their ways.
Mm.
And that means you're not going to learn from them. So I think the first thing about Jethro's appearance is that it reminds us that the truth doesn't know any single people. The truth is the truth.
And the second thing, as you said,
The second thing,
is that
that we
Torah,
have to be open to what the world is learning.
or put it the other way around, our religion, our Torah, with all of its wisdom and all of its guidance, doesn't exhaust everything that we need and everything that people know in the world, right? And
And that's exactly right. And I would put it even, I would put a finer point on that, which is what what makes you think that God gave all the truth to us?
right,
Why would you even think that? But that, okay, we got a lot of the truth on Sinai in this parsha. We got a lot of truth. But why would we think that we got it all? We didn't get it all. Other people got other things that are part of the truth that we should learn from. And if you look through Jewish history, you can see precisely where non-Jewish ideas have penetrated into Judaism and enriched us. First example is Jethro in this week's portion, which is the bureaucracy and how do you lead a people by dividing authority. The next, I would say, is Aristotle, who taught the rabbis about matter and form. And from that, they developed the idea of body and soul. And from body and soul, they developed the idea of, goof and neshama. And that's the world to come because your neshama goes on after death. So we learn from Aristotle. The 13 principles of Rabbi Yishmael, the Shlosha Esrei Midot of interpretation, that's from Roman law. That's directly from Roman law. So we learned that from the Romans. There was a teacher of Maimonides and Aquinas, so the greatest teacher of the Middle Ages, Averroes, who was called in Islam, in Arabic, Ibn Rushd. He lived from 1126 to 1198, I think. And he taught Maimonides and Aquinas that there's no conflict between philosophy and religion. He was part of the Muslim group called the Mutikalimun, the Muslim philosophers. And he taught about the Sfirot, which were used in the Zohar. He was the first one to teach about that. Immanuel Kant taught about how ethics has to be disinterested. It can't have a reward. You can't do a good thing for a reward. It has to be through a good motivation.
mm-hmm.
And that there is some, as you know, inkling of that in Ben Azai's teaching, that the reward of a mitzvah is a mitzvah. But basically, Reform Judaism and conservative Judaism learned its ethical teachings from 19th century German philosophers. I think Martin Luther King was an important teacher of Judaism, taught us what it meant for the Exodus to live for other people and how we should support civil rights as Jews. I think Ronald Reagan's embrace of Soviet Jewry was a very important element in teaching the Jewish people that the liberation of the Jewish people in this world cannot be accomplished just by Jews.
So there's a long history
Yeah,
of
those
our
are
of
just
our
some that I
of
come
our
to mind.
borrowing, right? Of our borrowing or our adopting or adapting cultural elements, ideas, forms from the cultures outside and making them our own. But I know what some of our listeners are thinking right now. They're thinking, "Oh, here's Feinstein and Gelman again," and they are telling us to assimilate. Because if you start doing what the non-Jewish world does, pretty soon, you give it all up. You give up Jewish distinctiveness. So, Mark, here's the really tough question. What do we assimilate and what don't we assimilate? What do we adopt and what don't we adopt? How do you know the difference? Best example, of course, is right. We adopted, for example, we adopted we adopted lots of things from the culture outside. The Hanukkah holiday is really a Greek military holiday that we adopted. We adopted the winter solstice and made it part of Hanukkah. But Christmas trees we haven't adopted, right? And families that have Christmas trees, and I know some of them, and they'll insist it's just a holiday decoration. It doesn't have religious connotations, and yet there's something treif about a Christmas. How do I know what I can take from the outside and what I can't? What is it? What are the signs that something I might be assimilating is actually poisonous to the organism of the Jewish people?
Well, I think the answer to that is what we are assimilating from the outside world something that deepens a belief we already have, or is what we are assimilating from the outside world something that weakens a belief we already have?
Mm-hmm.
I would say feminism, in its best iterations, helps us to understand the value of male and female, he created them, that we are equal. And I think that feminism helps us because it deepens the value within Judaism that men and women are both made in the image of God.
Okay.
On the other hand, the idea that sexuality is just a social construct, I look in vain to find that in Judaism. I don't see that here. I can't, as Buber once said about the slaughter of the Amalekites, I can't hear God's words in this passage.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if everything that the culture offers up to us should be assimilated. I know it shouldn't, but how you decide what goes in and what doesn't go in, the basic standard I use that is, does it lead to human flourishing? Or does it lead to a kind of destruction of the distinctions which civilized society is built on?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you have to go even farther, though, because I think it's also a question, does it strengthen Jewish peoplehood? Does it strengthen our commitment to our tribe, to our culture? Does it amplify something? I think your point is very good. If it's something in the culture that is amplified, like the notion that we are all created in the image of God is amplified by feminism. It's amplified by our acceptance of gay and lesbian Jews as part of our
Yes,
families and part of our lives and part of our communities.
yes.
But if I adopt certain religious beliefs from other faiths that undermine the distinctiveness of our people, that undermine the core concepts of our the God incarnate, the basic idea of Christianity. That undermines the basic notion of God as other, as God is beyond us, as transcendent. And so the Jewish tradition rejected that, resisted that idea.
I
One of
think
the
that's
real
right.
one of the really interesting ideas, this is an ongoing debate right now, of course, within the Jewish world. Zionism took up a Western idea, the
Yeah.
nation state, created a nation state for the Jewish people. Nowhere in the Torah does it say create a nation state. We did that. And we took democracy, I mean, a form of democracy, and we made that the government of the state of Israel. The state of Israel, while it has rabbis, even guys who call themselves chief rabbis, isn't governed by rabbis. It's governed by the will of the people through election system. None of that's Jewish. We adopted that because it furthered the survival of the people. But the question then is, at what point at some point does that undermine? Does it undermine because it puts stress on our ethics? It puts stress on our character. You see the problem. Sometimes you don't know at the moment. It takes 300 or 400 years to figure this stuff out.
I think that's right. There's a sort of a fight within liberal Judaism over the concept of tikkun olam.
Hmm.
Is that enriching us, or is that just importing into Judaism far left wing, woke, progressive ideas that some of which may be Jewish, some of which may not be, but just loading it all into Judaism makes us like the Democratic Party with holidays. And so some people are saying, well, wait a minute, there's some good stuff here in Tikkun Olam, there's some good ideas, but I think we've eaten it hook, line, and sinker. And we should be a little more critical about what a tikkun olam really means. So
Hmm.
that's an example of how there's some blowback on a contemporary religious issue.
Right. The question is, does Tikkun Olam eclipse our commitment to Jewish peoplehood? Does
Correct.
it eclipse our sense of distinctiveness as a culture? Does it equate our culture with every other culture? And these can be very dangerous ideas because then you say, well, then why bother? Being Jewish, I'll just go and be an advocate for social justice. Now, being an advocate for social justice is a very admirable thing. But it doesn't have to come at the price of Jewish peoplehood if Tikkun Olam is understood properly.
Right. And what you're advocating for social justice isn't always social justice.
Hmm.
People are confusing, I think, in the immigration debate. They're confusing a debate over whether we should accept immigrants with should we accept illegal immigrants. It's two very different things.
Yeah.
And when you conflate the two, the issue becomes very muddy. And there's other issues, um, capital punishment, abortion. There's a bunch of things that the culture, particularly liberal culture, has a certain view on that Judaism just doesn't endorse.
So let me ask you a personal question, and I don't want to push, but I just want to ask. So you had this marvelous, marvelous relationship with Father Hartman, who was your partner in your program, the God Squad, and the columns that you wrote. Were there religious convictions that he held dear that you said, I respect them, but they're just not
Yes,
mine?
yes.
And how did you communicate that in a way that was respectful?
There was one really just it mostly it was frightening how much we agreed on
Hmm.
it. I thought at the end he said, you'd make a good cardinal. I said, no, I'd be too mean. But basically, it came down to one gigantic difference of opinion that was that we could not resolve. It was the issue of unconditional forgiveness.
Mm.
It was absolutely at the core of his Christian faith that no matter what, forgiveness was always an appropriate gift to a sinner.
Hmm. To a sinner who repented, or to a sinner a sinner?
Ah, so that's what I said.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm happy to give every kind of to someone who says they're sorry and repents. He said, no, no, Mark. I'm talking about someone who does not repent.
Hmm.
And his point, he was very articulate about it. His point was, he said, Mark, if forgiveness is only offered to those who repent, then forgiveness is in a way earned. They earn their forgiveness, your forgiveness of them, by apologizing, asking forgiveness. But what if that's not the nature of forgiveness? What if the nature of forgiveness is that it's a gift, a free will gift? He said, I remember that you told me that when you pray on thy holidays, you say to God, I have no deeds. Ein banu maasim. He didn't know the Hebrew. And you're asking God to forgive you, even though you know you don't deserve to be forgiven.
Hmm.
Why would you ask God to do something for you that you weren't willing to do for somebody else? And Eddie, I tell you, I'm very rarely stumped. Not stumped in the sense of I don't know what to say, but stumped into the sense of, in the sense of, Tommy, I hear you, but you're leading me down a path in which I have to forgive Hitler.
Right.
And I can't do it. And he said, I understand. But the fact that you can't do it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it.
Hmm.
And I said, well, then it will be one of those things that my spiritual life could not embrace. And we'll have to just go forward with that. I'm willing to forgive anyone who is contrite. I'm not willing to forgive anyone who is not contrite.
Hmm. So you remember there was a very famous book put out, I think it's in the
Yes,
60s, by Simon Wiesenthal,
right.
who told a harrowing
The
story. He said,
sunflower or the
Sunflower, right. And the story is that a Nazi who was a consummate, horrible murderer Nazi is on his deathbed in a hospital, and
yeah,
he calls over the nurse or the orderly and says, I want to ask forgiveness. Is there a Jew in the building? And there was a Jewish guy working in the building, a janitor or something. And they bring the Jewish guy over, and the Nazi says to him, I did horrible, horrible things, and I ask your forgiveness. And the story stops there. And then Wiesenthal asked dozens of religious leaders and thinkers and theologians, what should he say? What should he do? And it's exactly what you spoke about. The Christian leaders said, of course he should forgive him. Forgiveness should be the gift of grace that reflects God's forgiveness and God's love. Holding on to the castigation, the anger is a sin. Of course he should. I mean, in this case, the guy actually asked for forgiveness. He didn't repent in any way. He just asked for forgiveness. He didn't want to die unforgiven. And all the
right,
Christian thinkers said yes. Heschel, Heschel's answer was very interesting. Heschel said, um, Heschel said that the janitor, the Jewish fellow, should say to him, um, "You can't. I'm not the one to ask forgiveness from. You have to go ask forgiveness from the ones that you harmed." And the answer, of course, is, "But there's far too many for me forever to ask forgiveness." He says, "Well, you have the rest of eternity to do it." To go to each one of them and ask them forgiveness. It's a very interesting the idea because I think you're right. There has to be in the Jewish calculus, moral responsibility precedes forgiveness. It precedes it chronologically and it precedes it logically. because it's a bigger idea than forgiveness. The idea that we are responsible for the acts and choices we make. And if we do incredibly destructive choices, we can be forgiven as long as we repair what we did, or at least repent what we did. Or, and it's a
But,
very interesting division, exactly this division.
right, but that may misrepresent the nature of chesed.
No, I don't think so.
I don't either, but that's Tommy's point.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. But I think that that's it. Jewish chesed is very important, but so's moral responsibility. So's moral responsibility.
There's another argument about this unwillingness to forgive that I encounter when I teach this topic to kids and adults. And that's the swimming, treading water while you're holding a big, heavy rock. You say, look, you don't have to forgive anybody of anything. But if you hold grudges and you don't forgive somebody, even if they're not repentant, it's like treading water while you're holding a heavy rock. You're going to sink. You're going to sink out of your own anger and your own feelings of revenge, and you're not going to be able to tread water. You're going to sink and drown.
Hmm.
So forgiving someone is not only the morally right thing to do, because forgiveness is a gift, it isn't something that's earned, but forgiveness also frees you from the burden of anger. The Buddha once taught the only way that wrath can be overcome is through non-wrath,
Right.
which it takes us back to, what we've learned from outsiders. There are people, the Gandhian notion of ahimsa, of nonviolence, and there's so much that we have learned, we can learn from others, and some of it contradicts what we teach.
Right.
Doesn't mean we're wrong. Doesn't mean they're right. It just means,
It just means it opens your eyes to ways in thinking
yes,
and ways of your own belief. You understand them more clearly, and sometimes you begin to doubt them. Maybe that's right. Maybe we hold on to too much. Maybe we hold on to. I mean, my mother refused to drive in a German car, ever. Right?
my grandma,
My
my grandma.
brother made it big in business, comes home with a BMW. My mother said, "Get that out of my driveway. I don't want it anywhere near." I said, "Mom, it's built in Kentucky. It's got BMW on it, but it's built in Kentucky by Americans." She said, "I don't care. It's Bavarian Motor Works. It's Hitler's car. I don't want it anywhere near me." My mother, like this was important to her, right? She wouldn't eat German chocolate cake. I said, "Mom, that was the guy's baker who created it. It doesn't come from Germany." She said, "I don't care. German chocolate cake. I don't want it in the house." Right?
I know.
But
I
maybe,
know, Eddie.
this was, and we do this, and I know, I might listen, God bless. I mean, my mother was adamant about this because she didn't want to forget and she didn't want to forgive because she was afraid that if you forgive, you forget. And that's what she was at. But sometimes you're right. Maybe. So let me ask you this question as we conclude this, Mark. We've talked about Yitro coming to Moshe and teaching him how to be a leader as symbolic of the conversation that Jewish tradition has always had with surrounding cultures and the way in which we've carefully assimilated, sometimes not so carefully, assimilated cultural forms from the outside world that enrich the life of the Jewish people. All right. What one form from the outside world do you think we need to bring in now or or introduce now or at least take seriously now from something in the outside world that we really need to learn from? What would you say?
Well, I would say that the fundamental idea that we need most is this Buddhist notion of compassion and
Mm,
kindness. I think our wandering around the world has put a hard edge on us. And I think in some ways that hard edge is not particularly attractive.
mm.
It's understandable. I have it. I learned it from my grandmother, who had the same view about Germans that your mother had. But I don't believe that it has helped us. I once did a lecture for you, and I asked your people, do you raise your hand if you think that Jews are a particularly difficult people to get along with? Almost everyone raised their hand.
I thought they'd say to you, "No, we're not." You know,
Exactly.
right?
So, but there is this Buddhist notion that the the two monks, it's instantiated in a little story. The two monks are on a journey, and
Mm,
one one monk does something to hurt the other one's feelings, and he writes down the incident in the beach, in the sand. And the next day, the the monk did something very kind to his partner on the journey, and the monk carved it into a stone.
mm.
The monk says, "Why did you do that? Why? One you wrote in the sand, one you wrote on a stone." He said, "Yeah, because writing it in the sand, it'll wash away. And that's the way I want to think of all the evils that have been done to me. I want to let them wash away. But those goodnesses, the acts of compassion and kindness that have been shown to me, I want to write them on rocks that where they will never wash away, and I
Mm.
will remember them forever."
That's beautiful. So, and I would add the Buddhist idea of serenity, of inner tranquility, as a goal of spiritual practice. I mean, I have a lot of friends who are Jewish now who meditate in some fashion or other, which
Yeah,
there was a tradition of Jewish meditation, but it was never this. It was never for the purpose of serenity and living in a stressful world. To be able to sit and breathe for a few moments and slow yourself down and feel the presence of God in your life, I think is actually something that we need to learn. I think the Buddhists have something to teach us in this. I mean, serenity's never been a Jewish value, but I think it needs to be. I think that's a beautiful way to think about it.
I'm searching for it this week.
Yeah, I know. And you have our blessings. And the
Thank
other
you.
thing is apropos of that, frankly, is I would say one of the things that Jewish tradition never did enough on is the body, is the
No
body.
question.
The way we have kashrus, but you can eat a very unhealthy kosher diet. The way we
Yes.
eat, the way we exercise, the way we carry ourselves. I mean, you and I work in synagogues. The idea that there's a 3 hour synagogue service is absurd. Who can sit that long? Your tush gets numb. The Jewish tradition always had a tradition of dance. The tradition was that Rabbi Akiva would start in one end of the room when he prayed and end up in the other because he moved, he danced his prayers. And the fact that we sit quietly and we're all talking heads without bodies that move and without paying attention to the health, the strength, the wholeness of the body is something I think that the Jewish tradition could sorely learn from the culture outside. We don't have to get fanatic. I don't want to lose the great traditions of Jewish mind and Jewish heart. But I think adding a tradition of rifuat haguf, of health and strength of the
Yes.
body, is something that we could learn a lot from. Well, let's go learn something, Mark. Take care. Let this week be a week of good health and strength. You have our
Thank
prayers and
you.
our blessings. And thank you to everybody for listening. Have a good Tu B'Shvat, a good week, wherever you are as the weather comes your way. Stay inside, stay warm, stay dry. We'll see each other next Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.